In this episode, we're going to hear from someone who picked up a strange entity on a 3D scan. Then we hear from a couple who vacationed in Missouri, but one of them ended up in the hospital. And finally, we go to Maine where we hear about a massive creature from above. Before we get into the stories, I'm very excited to announce the release of dreadsarmy.com, where I release strange and weird news every single day. I also post all of my stories here too. And if you want to be part of the conversation, join the Facebook group. Links below. Now let's get into the stories. Hey Donovan, hope you're doing well. You're probably doing better than I am. I was just fired from my job because of something I saw. For several years, I've been working for this company that creates VR and 3D interactive photos for the purposes of construction and selling real estate, logistics, and creating virtual tours for companies. My latest assignment was to do a 3D scan of one floor of an old office building. The client was trying to rent it out. I have to say right off the bat, this place gave me the creeps. I was ready to take the photos and 3D scans of this place and get out of there as quickly as possible. When I took the first scan, I couldn't capture anything in the room because of what appeared like a thick white fog that covered the entire room. I didn't see any fog in there with my eyes, so I figured it had to be smudges on the lenses of the 3D camera. I cleaned the lenses and tried to capture the room again. When I looked at the footage scanned, all that showed up was what looked like a dense fog that filled the room again. I was pretty frustrated, and I believed it was a technical malfunction of either the camera or our software that was causing me to waste my time in this run-down, creepy building. I moved on to a room on the other side of the building, thinking maybe it was some sort of electromagnetic interference. After doing another scan, I got the same result, and I figured I would try again later with different equipment. I took the 3D camera and my computer back to my work and had this guy Eric from the IT department look at the files of the scans. He told me that he had never seen anything like this happen before, and it must have been a glitch with the software on my computer. He gave me another camera and computer and I headed back to the old building. As soon as I got back there, I felt uneasy. But I was just ready to complete this job and never come back to that place again. I set up my equipment and took a scan of the main room. When I looked at the footage, it had successfully scanned the entire room, but it looked like there was this red filter on all the footage. It reminded me of those old 007 movies, where James Bond shoots the screen and blood drips down over the camera lens. I tried several more times. All of the footage was still red. I called my boss and explained all the technical malfunctions I was having. He told me to take the equipment to IT and just try again tomorrow. The next day I went up to IT and Eric told me that all of the equipment was working perfectly now. Relieved, I made my way back to this building and was ready to get this job behind me. I set everything up and began the scan. I left the room so I wouldn't be in the footage, and after a few moments I went back in. I checked the footage and this time on the computer screen, it said there was an error capturing the scan. I tried again and when I came back in, my computer said the same thing. I called IT and they told me to restart the computer, unplug the camera, and plug it back in. I did as they instructed and then I couldn't get my computer to register the camera as being plugged in. IT told me to bring the equipment to them and they would give me new equipment that they were sure worked perfectly. This entire process was a total pain. I was really frustrated, but I headed back to work. I went to IT, gave the old equipment to Eric, picked up the supposed working equipment, and went back to the building. I did another scan and prayed it would work, and went to check on the footage. This time, I captured the room perfectly, except there was a dark figure of what looked like a man's shadow in the corner of the room. I'm not sure what this was. So I set up the equipment to do another scan, ran out of the room, and I made sure I left plenty of time for the camera to scan the entire room. Now keep in mind, I've been doing this for years, and I've never had any problems before. When I got back into the room, the camera was smashed on the ground, and the computer in the scan was incomplete. This camera had a round stand on the bottom, so it was pretty much impossible for it to tip over. Something must have picked it up and hurled it onto the ground. It was also an expensive camera and made of sturdy metal. It wasn't the type of thing to break easily. I freaked out and grabbed everything and ran out of there. I took it to IT and explained what happened. He looked at me like I was crazy, so I begged him to look at my past captures. The fog, the redness, the dark figure, and my last attempt for anything out of the ordinary. The computer read that the scan was incomplete, but Eric was able to extract what the camera had captured before it was smashed. There was a gray hand reaching down towards the camera. We both froze and stared at it. I was terrified and asked him to send me the files. I ran to my boss's office and explained to him what had happened. He accused me of lying and fired me on the spot for destroying company property and for time theft. I begged him to look at the footage and told him I wasn't lying, but he had security escort me out of the building with all my stuff. Later, I called Eric to send me the files, and he told me to meet him for some coffee. At the coffee shop, Eric told me that our boss had all the files erased and the computer that I captured it on destroyed. I still can't believe this happened to me. Why were there spirits in the building so hostile to me? I don't understand why my boss acted that way he did towards me. Why would he want the evidence destroyed? And why did he fire me so quickly? So many unanswered questions. I'm forced just to move on and get another job. I'm still in shock over everything that happened. Hi, Donovan. With so many incredible stories that you tell, I don't know if you'll end up publishing this one or not, but I would appreciate your opinion on what I experienced in Missouri a few summers ago. My wife and I were overdue for a vacation, and we wanted to get out of the state and forget the world for a while. We ended up renting this amazing cottage on hundreds of acres of land in Missouri. It was gorgeous. There were rolling hills and woods as far as the eye could see, and a beautiful river that ran right through the property. My favorite thing about it all was there was a hot tub covered in lanai where you could sit and take in the sights. I wanted to check out the whole property one day, so I followed the property line and ended up going pretty deep into the woods. The wildlife around there was incredible, and I even saw black bears and wild boars roaming around carefree. It was nature's beauty at its finest. I would love to know what that property costs. I got out to this one area of the woods where a river ran right through it, and you could follow the river for miles. I did this for a while, and I saw this big, majestic bison drinking water right out of the river. I was pissed I didn't have my phone with me to take a picture, but I was determined to get as close as possible. The closer I got to it, however, the less it looked like a bison. It was huge and furry like one, but it had these jagged spikes along its back, like nothing I'd ever seen on an animal before. It also had one giant horn on top of its head like a rhino. It was the strangest looking creature I'd ever seen before. It started freaking me out the closer I got to it, and I decided to keep a healthy distance between it, as I had no idea what it was. It took massive gulps of water at a time. I could hear it from a decent distance away. Suddenly, the beast looked at me, and I was terrified. It had one giant eye, and it screamed at me so loudly it shook the ground. I immediately took off into the woods. I must have been so scared that I passed out. I woke up later that night in the dark, with no phone and no flashlight, miles away from the cottage. I had no idea where I was, and I didn't know what direction to start walking in. I was really scared, and it crossed my mind that I might die in the middle of the woods that night, with nobody around to find me. I finally found the river, and I figured I would follow the river to keep an eye out for anything that looked familiar. I kept walking and walking alongside the river, and eventually, I smelled the faint smell of a campfire. My wife must have lit one. I kept following the river, and the smell of the campfire got stronger and stronger. Finally, I saw the campfire in the cottage and made my way towards it. By this point, I was beyond exhausted, hungry, and dehydrated. I got close to the campfire, and I must have passed out again. The next thing I know, I wake up in the hospital, and my wife is sitting next to my bed. I told my wife about the nasty beast I saw. I talked about the large bison-like body and jagged spikes across its back, the giant horns on its head, and the most unusual part, its big singular eye. My wife told me I was just hallucinating from dehydration, and I just needed to rest. The nurse came in to check on me, and I told her all about this creature I saw. She told me about an urban legend that was unique to Missouri, called the Mini Washitu. which fit the exact physical characteristics that I described. When I looked it up, it said that anybody who saw it became crazy, writhed around in unspeakable pain, and was only relieved from these ailments through inevitable death. Luckily, I never experienced any of those awful things, and I am still very much alive to tell the tale. It has me believing, however, that maybe what I saw wasn't a one-of-a-kind creature, but more of a common creature that was relatively rare and commonly mistaken as a mythical one. I will say one thing though, the beast's scream was the worst thing that I'd ever heard to this day. The scream was not an ordinary roar of an animal. It shook me and everything around it, and it made me immediately fear for my safety and for my life. Everyone I tell this story to stops believing me the minute I mentioned it had one eye. But that's the part that's burnt into my memory. What a hideous creature I saw that day. I'll never forget seeing it, and I hope I never see it or anything like it again. Let me know if you have any insight on what this creature could have been. Hey Donovan, I've got a story to tell you. I'm still processing it. In all honesty, my therapist says it's better to talk about it than to keep it all bottled up inside. So I'll start off with a bit about me. My name's Sam and I'm in junior college at the University of Maine. I'm studying environmental science and engineering. I'm a big hiker and I love to get outdoors in any capacity. Running, skiing, tubing, fishing, whatever it is. They're all just peaceful activities, and my therapist says it's good for me because it gives me some time away from my anxiety in peace and quiet. I even got into bird watching. I'm not too skilled at bird watching, but I've gotten better this last semester because I took a class in ornithology. There are a few main points to birding that I learned. You always need a good pair of binoculars, and a field guide can be your best friend, but your ears can be your most useful tool. Birds make all kinds of different calls depending on what they're trying to communicate. They might call for a mate, or that they spotted food, or as a warning, or to communicate directions or to signal danger. Some birds have lots of different calls and sounds and songs, and they usually have a variety of different pitches and vocalizations along with them. I've memorized most of the common sounds here in the Northeast, and you can do a pretty good job matching them up with the correct bird. I've also been out hiking enough to recognize the look of most, depending on if they're a male or female, or a fledgling or an adult or a senior. That's a lot to learn, and I've been determined to learn it all. I've been going out almost every morning on the weekends to see what I can find. Early morning is usually the best time for birding, because it's not too hot for them, and some of their predators aren't up yet, or have just gone to bed. You know what they say, the early bird gets the worm. I had been hiking for about a mile at Moose Point State Park, and I had seen a lot of different birds. I started to hike up a hill to get a better viewpoint and maybe catch some overstory birds flying by. I found a path that winded up the mountain and took me to this perfect aerial viewing in a clearing. I sat down and took a breather. It wasn't long before I felt a shadow fly over me. I looked up as quickly as I could, but I didn't see anything in the sky. Then I heard some rustling in the trees. I pulled out my binoculars and tried to get a better look. All I could see is this black wing popping in and out of a massive pine tree. The entire trunk was swaying back and forth as needles and branches flew out in all directions. All of a sudden, this creature popped out of the tree line. I thought it could have been a vulture or a raptor or an eagle, but the wings were far too large, and its face wasn't like a bird at all. In fact, the most shocking thing was it didn't really have a face at all. Only these bright red eyes that were tracking something down below. It had the body of a person almost, but it was covered in this thin layer of black fuzz. Its wings were huge and spread out almost 2 yards wide. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It started to dart down below the trees, and I stood up with my binoculars to follow it. For a while, the whole forest was silent, and then I heard this deer crying in pain. The leaves on another tree shook, and then out of a clearing below, this creature came flying by with the doe stuck between its talons. It was a bit off kilter from carrying its weight, but it flapped its huge wings smoothly nonetheless. I followed the beast with my binoculars for as long as I could, but eventually it was out of my sight for good. I sat there in shock for a while, and then made my way down the hill to get out of that forest. As I approached the area where the deer got scooped up from, I saw a mess of fallen trees, broken branches, and leaves strewn all about. Certainly a struggle had taken place. I got out of there as quickly as I could and spent the rest of the day Googling what I had seen. Although it seems unlikely to have been this far north, I do believe I saw what you call a Mothman. It certainly was not a normal bird or a bat. If this thing was able to pick up an adult deer, would it be able to pick up me too? Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And also check out Lilith Dread. She releases almost every single day. Thanks and take care.